Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be talking about the Fabian Society. What is the Fabian Society? The Fabian Society is a British socialist organisation whose purpose it is to advance the principles of democratic socialism, as they call it, via gradualist and reformist efforts in democracies, rather than by revolutionary overthrow, as say is the case with communism. As one of the founding organisations of the Labour Representation Committee in 1900, it has had an important influence upon the British Labour Party, which grew from it. The Fabian Society has also had a massive impact on British politics as a whole. And in fact, it doesn't stop there. Members of the Fabian Society have included political leaders from countries that were formerly part of the British Empire, such as India and Pakistan as well. So with leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who adopted Fabian principles as part of their political ideologies, you see how their countries began to decline and very quickly ended up in ruin. The Fabian Society also founded the London School of Economics and Political Science in 1895. And what's interesting about that is the majority of people that study there end up becoming world leaders in their own countries, in third world countries most of the time as well. And they then implement these very same things that they've been indoctrinated with at the LSE. Now, the society functions primarily as a think tank. At least that's what they call themselves. All of these groups always call themselves think tanks, but what they really are is an occult society. And it's one of 21 socialist societies in the UK. Similar societies exist in Australia, such as the Australian Fabian Society, in Canada, under the Douglas Coldwell Foundation. That's a very important organisation. Look that up. If you are in Canada, study on this. And also the now disbanded League for Social Reconstruction. They also exist in Sicily as the Sicilian Fabian Society and in New Zealand as the New Zealand Fabian Society. The Fabian Society was founded on the 4th of January in 1884 in London as an offshoot of a society founded a year earlier called the Fellowship of the New Life. The Fellowship of the New Life was founded in 1883, and their objective was the cultivation of a perfect character in each and all. That sounds innocuous until you understand what it was really all about. They wanted to transform society and mold human beings into their own image because, as I'll talk about later on, they believed themselves to be gods, right? They believed themselves to be gods unto themselves. At one meeting of the fellowship, the Vita Nuova was created and adopted by the group's members. This basic document formed the core set of beliefs held by the society. The object or objective was the cultivation of perfect character in each and all. The principle, the subordination of material things to spiritual things. Now this is very important. Why? Because this ties into the New Age agenda. If you ignore your material needs and you completely focus on the spiritual, which is what these folks were proposing, then you end up doing significant damage to yourself and to others, right? Because you cannot exist without the material, right? The body cannot exist without the mind, and the mind cannot exist without the body, okay? But these people put all the focus, or tried to swing people towards having zero focus on the material. Fellowship. The sole and essential condition of fellowship shall be a single-minded, sincere and strenuous devotion to the object and principle. Design. The promotion by both practice and precept of the following methods of contributing toward the attainment of that end. The supplanting of the spirit of competition and self-seeking by that of unselfish regard. Now again, this sounds innocuous until you understand, right, that the spirit of competition is central to every living being, particularly to human beings, excelling right? Without the spirit of competition, we have no need to excel. We compete for everything in order to attain, in order to do better, to be better. But if you eliminate the spirit of competition, which is what these folks were talking about, what happens? Well, you just end up becoming an authoritarian collective, which is what these people want. They go on to talk about the simplicity of living, the highest and completest education of the young. Incidentally, they don't talk about in this document, they don't talk about education in the sense that you and I would talk about it. What they're really speaking about is indoctrination, ideological indoctrination of the young. And the younger the better, as far as they're concerned. This is a sick and evil ideology. It's a sick and evil group that came up with this. And you'll see why as we go on. Of particular interest in this organization, the preceding organization, the fellowship organization, which later became the Fabian Society. Of particular interest are the two founding members of this secret society, Henry Havelock Ellis and his wife Edith Ellis. Havelock Ellis was an English physician and sexologist. He was the co-author of the first medical textbook in English on homosexuality in 1897, and he actually pushed for normalizing it, normalizing the practice, right? I'm not talking about accepting the practice, I'm talking about the normalization of this practice. Please understand the difference between these two things, okay? You can accept someone for what they are, that's one thing. But to try and normalize it, what that actually means, it's a very clever play on words. What it mostly means in socialist jargon is to foist that upon everyone else, on the greater populace, right? And he also published works on a variety of sexual practices and inclinations, as well as transgender psychology. So most of the stuff that's out there in the field of psychoanalysis on these matters, that's propagated even now, which is wholly subjective, right? They advocate for the subjective experience, and purely the subjective experience. There's no balance in it. That all came out of Henry Havelock Ellis's work. He is also credited with introducing the notions of narcissism and autoeroticism, which were later adopted by psychoanalysis. Ellis was among the pioneering investigators of psychedelic drugs and the author of one of the first written reports to the public about an experience with mescaline, which he conducted on himself in 1896. Now that's not a big deal in and of itself, apart from the fact that you've got a drug user, an addict, who was attempting to push his beliefs onto everybody else. In fact, he wanted to force the public at large to accept his worldview, which was severely twisted. Why was it twisted? Because he supported eugenics. Okay, this guy was a eugenicist. In fact, to prove this point, I can tell you that if you look up this guy's biography, you'll find that he served as the president of the Eugenics Society. Okay? He served as its president. He was pushing for eugenics. He was a eugenicist. Now, Edith Ellis, his wife, that's a laughable term actually, and you'll see why, was a lecturer, writer, secretary, and general factotum of Fellowship House. She was openly lesbian and had several affairs with women, which her husband was aware of. Their open marriage was the central subject in Havelock Ellis's autobiography, My Life, which was published in 1939. You should read that because you'll get a sense of who these people were. They were wackos. They were completely and utterly whacked out their nut. Edith Ellis was among the first people to push for a conflation of feminism, socialism, and the LGBT or gay agenda. Okay? These people were ideologically driven. This is where the Fabian Society came from, because both husband and wife later became central key members in the offshoot organization, the Fabian Society, as well. But again, no one else will talk about this. No one will tell you any of this. This is what frustrates me the most, is that the information on this organization and these people is there. And the preceding organization that I've been talking about. So, members of the fellowship wanted to become politically involved to, as they put it, aid society's transformation. So, all members were free to attend both societies. Now, the Fellowship of the New Life was dissolved in 1899, but the Fabian Society grew to become the preeminent academic society in the UK in the Edwardian era. And this is where it came from, right? You've got a bunch of eugenicists that are pushing sexual deviance onto society and a wish to destroy that society, believing themselves to be gods. This is what it was all about. This is what happened. It's insane that people don't understand this. And governments across the world, by the way, adopted their principles. Wholesale. They didn't even question them. They just adopted them. And no one wonders why the world is in the state that it's in right now. Now, the Fabian Society was named at the suggestion of Frank Podmore in honour of the Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus. His Fabian strategy sought general and gradual victory against the superior Carthaginian army under the renowned general Hannibal through persistence, harassment, and wearing down the enemy by attrition. This is exceptionally important to grasp, because what we're saying here, what the Fabians actually are saying here, is that they are waging a war of attrition against humanity. They are admitting to that. And the populations are too stupid to understand this. They are waging war on you. So, the original Fabian coat of arms is the wolf in sheep's clothing. And it's actually known by that name. It's actually called the wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, according to author John Perdue, the logo of the Fabian Society, a tortoise, is representing the group's predilection for a slow, imperceptible transition to socialism, while its coat of arms, a wolf in sheep's clothing, represented its preferable methodology, the preferred methodology for achieving its goal. Go and Google search. This is my advice to you. Go and Google search the Fabian coat of arms, the wolf in sheep's clothing. You will see this for yourself. They are telling you what they're all about. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. They are predatory. They see you as the prey. Now, Bertrand Russell is an interesting chap because he became a member of the society briefly, but he resigned after he expressed his belief that the society's principles of entente, in this case between countries allying themselves against Germany, could lead to war, which is exactly what happened. Bertrand Russell went on further to try and explain to the people, although it was kind of futile, a little bit like what I'm doing, to be honest with you. He went on to tell people that the First World War and the Second World War were primarily the creations of the Fabian Society. Right? And that Britain would end up at war, particularly with World War I. Britain would end up at war, which is exactly what happened. He was trying to warn people of what was coming if they kept going down this road of following the Fabians. Did anyone listen? No. Now, at the core of the Fabian Society, aside from the married couple that we talked about, were Sidney and Beatrice Webb. They were instrumental, particularly in the second generation of Fabians, which I'll talk about in a second as well. They were instrumental in pushing foreign leaders particularly, but also domestic governments, to accept their version of economic policy. Okay? They wrote a number of studies, including alternatives to the current systems of capitalism. So they proposed alternative cooperative economics that applied to ownership of capital as well as land. Right? Their economic models were based on complete socialist doctrine. To explain this to you in basic terms, they believed that all capital should be communally owned, but not owned by the people, but by governments. Okay, so for those of you that are a little bit slow, that's communism in a nutshell. Another interesting factoid, if you're interested in this sort of stuff, is that the first Fabian Society pamphlets advocated for social justice. These pamphlets were printed in the 1900s, the early 1900s. And the term social justice is a phrase that we are now suddenly beginning to become aware of, aren't we? Why is that? Well, because it's gained traction because of these social justice warriors, these SJWs. And this same pamphlet, by the way, or series of pamphlets which they released, but the first one also called for a series of reforms during the early 1900s, including eugenicist policies. Okay? They wanted governments to adopt eugenicist policies. They were advocating for eugenics again. Now, in the period between the two world wars, as I talked about a little bit, the second generation of Fabians emerged. Many of the future leaders of the Third World were exposed to Fabian thought, as we talked about. Most notably, India's Jawaharlal Nehru, who subsequently framed economic policy for India on Fabian socialist lines. After independence from Britain, or supposed independence, Nehru's Fabian ideas committed India to an economy in which the state owned, operated, and controlled the means of production. It's a less-known fact that the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was also an avid member of the Fabian Society in the early 1930s. And as I already said at the outset, what happened? The countries that did this ended up in economic ruin, mass starvation. Why? Because this is what it always leads to. Now, I want to talk a little bit, I'm just going to touch a little bit in this video on the occult part of the Fabian Society. There's much more to it than this. But as an introduction, I just want to give you something to think about. The Fabian Society is governed by an elected executive committee. And the committee consists of 10 ordinary members elected from a national list, 3 members nationally elected from a list nominated by local groups. This is their public statement on all of this. But these 10 members that are the so-called ordinary members are not very ordinary at all, because if you look at their links to other occult societies, you'll find that they are very, very prominent in those. But the 3 members especially are typically high-ranking. right? They say they're nationally elected, but again, you'll find that they're not. This is a triumvirate. Okay? This is a triumvirate. I talked about this before once in my video on the fact that you are living under an occultocracy. Now, the head major duomo, if you like, organization that I spoke about in that video, which is the Circle of the Black Sun, operates on very similar premises, right? And the Fabians do the same thing, right? For those of you that can count, and that's a very rare breed of person in this day and age. Why? Because they're pushing this relativist nonsense that 2 + 2 = 5 in today's societies. But for those of you that can properly count mathematically, numerically, that's 13 members. And if you understand anything about these occult societies, you'll understand they always have 13 members. Always, without exception. So I hope you understand the occult significance of that. And if you don't, I don't know what the hell to tell you. I don't know where you've been living for the last 50 years. Anyway, one final thing I'll tell you about them. In the early 1900s, Fabian Society members advocated for the ideal of a scientifically planned society. If you ever hear anyone saying these kind of things, by the way, be very, very wary of them, because the chances are they're either supporting an agenda that's being pushed by the Club of Rome or by the Fabians themselves. Okay? They also pushed for eugenics by way of sterilization. Okay? They were all in favor of sterilizing people. Again, like I was talking about, take a look at what is happening across the West, in America, in Canada, in Britain, in Germany, in Sweden, across Europe, in Japan. What is going on? Birth rates are through the floor. They are falling, declining rapidly. Among the indigenous population, among the assimilated population, they are declining. The intelligent people are not reproducing. The average people are not reproducing. What is going on? The answer is sterilization. This is the Fabian agenda at work. You are completely batshit Looney Tunes if you think this is normal. If you think this is the end result of some normal biological process or of some process of economic prosperity, you are out of your fucking mind. Okay? You're out of your mind if you think that's what's going on. This is a eugenics sterilization agenda at play. They said it. They said they were going to do this in the early 1900s. And as the Fabian Society gained greater and greater control over our societies, what happened? Oh, magically, people are suddenly sterile. Because they're the undesirables, right? Why are they the undesirables, by the way? I don't know if any of you have ever thought about that. Who are the undesirables? They're all the people that can think. Right? If you're capable of critical thinking, you're an undesirable. Because the first people that stand up against tyranny are those that can think. They are those people that know the system. They are dissidents. Anyway, H.G. Wells. I was going to say something about H.G. Wells as well. Because some people mention H.G. Wells and how he was a member of the Fabian Society. And that is true. But he was a member from 1903 to 1908. 5 years. A very brief period of time. And he got into it to try and understand what it was all about. And once he did, he became a vehement vocal critic of its operations. He published a paper in 1905, and most people won't have read it. He published a paper called The Faults of the Fabian, and he detailed what was wrong with the Fabians' ideology. Then he parodied the society in his 1910 novel, The New Machiavelli. He was not a fan of them. Once he understood what it was all about, he realized that he needed to make the public aware. But again, nobody paid attention. If you list the number of people that have tried to bring this to people's attention, right? We've got Bertrand Russell, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, H.G. Wells. Each one of them has been ignored by society at large. Each one of them. And I have no doubt that this video will probably be ignored by the majority. Because they're comfortable in their ignorance. They are comfortable in their malaise. And if you see that I'm getting more and more frustrated, it's because I am. I'm frustrated with the ignorance. I'm frustrated with the lack of ability to think among people. And I'm frustrated with how quickly people become ideologically polarized. Anyway, I'll end this video on the following point. It's plain to see when one looks at the origins of Fabianism that they intended to re-establish the fascistic Roman Empire. Not the ancient Roman Empire or the Rome of Marcus Aurelius, but Rome under the rule of tyrants. Okay, this is what's going on. The re-establishment of the Holy Roman Empire. And right now you've got current governments across the world, in the UK, Canada, Australia, Germany, balls deep in this organisation, as well as the Club of Rome. So until people start understanding these organisations and their roles in what is going on, right? Until they understand that the ideologies that are being perpetuated by various forms of identity politics, who's pushing that, why they're pushing that, why they're creating the schisms in society, why governments are becoming increasingly totalitarian, nothing's going to change. And most people don't want to do the hard work of understanding any of this. They don't want to read the stuff that I've read. They don't want to listen to the things that I've listened to. They don't want to take any time out from their lives to make any real significant changes, to make any real significant effort. They don't want to do it. But that's all because these plans of these Fabians are slotting into place. And they've been doing it for such a long time, since the early 1900s. Anyway, I'm going to leave this video here for now. But I want to thank you very much for watching if you have watched, and take good care of yourselves, and God bless every one of you.